Hi everybody, welcome to another Lightroom training session. Hope you're all keeping warm in this cold weather. We'll get started in just a second. While we wait for more people to join, I'm going to put a couple of links again in the chat. So if you are not on the Joburg Photowalkers meetup group for some reason, you should be. I've got a little link for you there. You can join the meetup group for Joburg Photowalkers. If you click on that link, I'm going to put a few more links in. We've got a WhatsApp group for these training sessions. So this next one I'm going to copy in is the WhatsApp group. So there you go. That's the WhatsApp group. If you want to join the WhatsApp group, any questions, editing related, technical questions, whatever you've got, they're all welcome there in the training WhatsApp group. You'll also get some reminders, weekly reminders when we do these live sessions. And then the last one is the email list. So there's an email list, a MailChimp email list for these training sessions. So the link goes out every week. So it's a bit of a reminder, and you can just click through on the link as well that's in this email. So if you want to join the mailing list, that's where you can do it. And then as always, you can also just subscribe to this channel to get reminders when we're going live. Good. Hope everybody's doing well, keeping warm. We're going to get started just now with some advanced Lightroom masking. So we're going to be editing a few different images, and we're basically going to try and use mostly just masking. It's a very powerful tool. It's become much more powerful over the last months. Lightroom has continuously worked to improve their masking tools. We've seen the addition of a couple of new AI-based, artificial intelligence-based masking tools, so we'll look at those. We touched on them in a previous session when we just did an introduction on masking. Today we're going to look at some cases where Lightroom gets the masking wrong in specific images for a specific reason. We'll see how to solve those issues. We'll see how we can use multiple masks to build the mask that we actually need for specific reasons to edit some of these images. So yeah, advanced masking and editing with masking in Lightroom. Just a small note as well, these masking tools are available in all versions of Lightroom. So whatever we're using today or tonight, you can find it in Lightroom Classic. The newer versions of Lightroom Classic, you will also find it in the new cloud-based Lightroom that you could run on mobile devices, phones, tablets, laptops. Your desktop computer also runs the new Lightroom. So whichever version of Lightroom you've got, you'll find these tools there. So that's quite nice. They've rolled it out to absolutely all their different versions. So if you've got any of the newer updates in the last few months, you should have all these tools. Good. Going to get started just now. We'll leave a minute or two just for more people to join. I see there's continuously more people coming in. While we wait, I am looking for some suggestions on edits to do, technical things to cover, any technical topics. Now, as we've moved through Lightroom, we've basically covered all the basic tools of Lightroom. We've done some examples of all these basic tools. And so, yeah, I've still got a couple of ideas on my list, but I'm definitely looking for some new ones. So if you've got questions, if you've got specific tools or specific types of editing you want to see, specific types of photography where we can do some edits for you, let me know. I'm definitely looking for some nice ideas. It could be editing related, but also any technical questions. So we could cover other topics as well. It's Training Wednesdays. If you want to cover more camera related, settings related topics, you're welcome to post any of those ideas. Yeah, if you've got any photography related questions, let me know and I'll slot it in for a future session. Also, another little thing that I've been looking at is how some famous photographers, especially street photographers, because I follow quite a lot of street photographers online. I've been looking at how they edit and how they get specific looks. So I'm also thinking about in coming weeks to do edits similar to what they're doing. I think it's a worthwhile exercise. I do it myself. I look at some edits that I like, finding them online or in photography books, and then I ask what part of this image was done in camera and what part was enhanced and made better with editing, and then I try to replicate this. So the more different looks I can replicate both in camera and with my editing afterwards, it just gives me more tools in my toolbox. And when it comes to client work or my own work, I think it just makes my own work better. So my own style, my own look that I do for my own street photography, hopefully I try to keep it unique. But all these trying to copy other edits just for myself, I might not even share it with anybody, but trying to copy different edits that other people are doing just teaches me a lot about editing and why people are editing in a specific way. And then because I try all these different ones, I can find my own style and what I like with editing, and hopefully a unique style. So I think there's definitely, if you think back to maybe Renaissance painters or something like that, a lot of the up-and-coming painters worked with experienced masters, and a lot of painters started off by just copying existing work. That's what they did. They copied different existing works just to get a feel for it, to learn how to do it, and then afterwards they developed their own style and worked from there. So I think it's definitely, even though I don't like just copying somebody's style and posting it as my own work, I think it's definitely a worthwhile thing to do, is looking at different people, looking at different influences, and then trying to replicate it, because if you can replicate something, then you can also start working on your own style. Okay, so that's just a quick introduction. And again, if anybody's got suggestions on edits to do, technical questions, you've got the topics we can cover in these weekly sessions, that would be great. I'd be happy to look at that. Also, if you've got suggestions of photographers where you like the look of what they're doing, maybe it's somebody I haven't heard of before, maybe it's somebody I'm not following online, so you can also just suggest some photographers and we can look at their work and see, try to figure out why they're doing something and how they're doing it, and in how to incorporate some of those tools maybe in our own toolboxes. Okay, so let's get started with some advanced masking. I'm going to be editing on my iPad again, but like I said, these advanced masking tools, they're available on all versions of Lightroom currently, all the latest ones. Okay, let's hop into my iPad. We've got some example images that we're going to be working on, and I selected on purpose some images that the artificial intelligence is actually having some trouble with. And I have to say the artificial intelligence in Lightroom, especially on the masking side, is improving with every update. It's getting better. So we're seeing that the artificial intelligence is getting better at finding subjects, finding sky, all these different things that it can do. But I've gone in and looked for images that's actually hard images for Lightroom to do, and so they're good examples of sort of worst case, and now we can get past that. Okay, so this is the first one, just an image in close to Braamfontein on one of the Joburg Photowalkers walks. Not Braamfontein, sorry, it's close to Standard Bank actually, so it is Marshalltown side. Anyway, it was a good photo walk and I got this image, and it's actually a tricky one for the artificial intelligence to pick out the subject. Let me show you first what happens without any help from me, and then what we can do to make it a little bit better. So first off, if I just go to masking, and our masking tool is here on the side, you will find this masking tool in the bottom panel on mobile phones in Lightroom. You will also find masking just in a different spot if you're editing on your laptop or desktop computer, but it's definitely available. Just figure out where that little button is. So I'm pressing the masking button, and this is what masking looks like. Okay, this panel on this side is all our normal adjustments. There are a couple missing. So when you're adjusting the complete image, the normal edit tab, so this tab, if we go there, you'll see there's a few more options. Some of the things inside these drop downs also would be missing as soon as we go to masking. So but most of our tools that we would normally use under the light panel, the color panel, the effects panel, the details panel, and the optics panel would be available. Okay, so we get access to all these things, but now instead of applying it to the whole image, we're actually picking parts of this image and applying those same tools that we've previously used only to specific parts of our image. Okay. Now, one thing that definitely helps is if you've got an underexposed image, very often I underexpose just to preserve some highlight detail, especially in the sky and clouds. If you've got an underexposed image, what I've found from my experiments with the AI inside of the masking is just to brighten up your image a tiny bit before you apply artificial intelligence masking. That will help Lightroom to actually figure out where the subject is. If everything is dark, Lightroom sometimes has an issue to actually isolate that subject. We'll see another example of that. So before we start, and after you've made the mask, you can then go back to your overall adjustments and darken it down if that was your idea with the image. So if you've got a dark and moody image, you might want to just brighten it up with the exposure slider overall, do your masking, and then bring that exposure slider back down to where you get your dark and moody feel. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. The AI does look at the image as it is, and if it's too dark, it might struggle to find your subject. Okay, so very first thing we're going to do is just overall, I'm just going to hit auto just to brighten up this image a bit, so just to help Lightroom find my subject there. So you can see before it was a pretty underexposed image, and now it's just a bit more bright and easier to see the detail in this image. Okay, now we're going back to masking. You'll see right over here at the bottom, we've got a little plus sign, and that will add a mask. Okay, so that's how we add a mask. If I click this little plus sign, I get all my different options for adding masks. So we've seen this in a previous session. We can do select subject. That's artificial intelligence based. So Lightroom will look at your image and try to decide what was your subject in this image. Select sky. It will try and find the sky for you and just mask the sky. Brush, you can paint in any places where you want the mask applied. Linear gradient, that's just as it says, a linear gradient that you can apply to a part of the image. A radial gradient, that's a round mask or an oval mask. Color range, that's one of the newer ones. So you can select based on color, and Lightroom will mask out everything that's a similar color to the area that you select. Luminance range, this is also one that's interesting. So it's how bright or dark a specific place where you pick is, and it will find all the other places in your image that's similarly bright or dark or whatever that specific brightness is. So luminance range. Okay. Depth range we've mentioned previously. If you've got a mobile phone that's got that built-in LiDAR that can give you depth detail in the file, then you can also mask by how far something is or how deep something is into your image, or how far it is from your mobile phone. So this will only really apply if you're using a mobile phone that's got that sensor that gives you depth. Okay. In most cases, that would be grayed out if you're using a normal camera. Great. So these are our options, and I'm going to just select subject. So you'll see Lightroom now analyzes my image, and it will try and find my subject. Now, what do we see? It's not bad, just as a first go. To me, my subject is actually the person in the foreground. Lightroom has gone through and said, well, there's somebody there at the top as well, and this structure, this V-shaped structure, is Lightroom decided is part of our subject. So maybe I want to adjust all of that. but most probably I actually only want to adjust the subject in the foreground separate from the rest of the image. So how do we do that? We basically want to tell Lightroom to ignore everything that's there in the top, and there's a couple of ways to do this. So this is where we're getting into a bit more of the advanced masking, and a good spot to start, you'll see right here, this is my mask that I just created, and you'll see in that little image, the black and white little square there, you can see a representation of what's masked. Okay. What you can also do on the mobile version of Lightroom, because screen space is less than on desktop versions. On desktop versions, it should be visible already, but on the mobile version, you can actually, you'll see there's a little white bar right there. You can actually grab that and pull it out, and your masking panel slides out from under the other tools. Okay, what can we do there? We can rename this mask, so we can call it subject. So that will be our subject. Actually, I want to rename it and call it background. So what I'm trying to do right now is I only want the background as my mask. I want to adjust the background independent of the subject in the front. Okay, so that's where we're going to start. Now you'll also see there's a add to background and a subtract from background. Okay, and the other thing to take notice of is we can invert our mask right here. This is the invert button and the delete mask button just below it. So what are we going to do? We're going to subtract from background. So it's this option down here. We want to subtract the pieces of this mask that we don't want. Okay, we're going to start and only mask out the subject, and then we're going to flip it around. Okay, so let's do that quickly. I'm going to, just for a start, just go, let's do a color range. So right now, I'm telling Lightroom to subtract everything that's the same color as wherever I put this little sample tool. I'm going to put it there, and then I've got a refine slider at the bottom, and I'm going to tell it take less of that color. So be very sensitive to just taking that one color that I picked. I picked white on that pole. Now if I go the other way, it's taking more colors that's close to that white, so it's going into the grays as well. Okay, so I'm going to slide it all the way over to this side, and you'll see a lot of what was in that mask is now gone. Going to apply that, so most of this white pole is now subtracted from my mask, and I'll just keep going. So I'll go subtract again. I'm going to put a linear gradient over this top, and you'll see as I move this gradient up and down, I can exclude the top part of my image. So now that whole top part is not part of my mask anymore. So we're getting closer to only having our subject. Okay, like I said, this is a worst case. In most cases, Lightroom will actually be really good at finding that subject. But if you get an image like this where it's a confusing composition, Lightroom is adding some extra things, you can just go and subtract it. So we're going back to subtract, and now I'm just going to clean it up with the brush. So the brush tool, I'm going to just zoom in, and whatever I'm brushing over right now is going to be subtracted from my mask. So I'm just cleaning up this mask everywhere where Lightroom decided to mask that I didn't want in my mask, and that should about do it. So now we've got only our subject selected in this mask. There we go, that's our image. Only the subject is left in the mask, and I can actually go right here to my invert button, and it's going to flip this mask around, and only my background, so everything except this subject, will now be selected. Should be. Sorry. We actually need to add all our negative subtract ones. Should actually be adding ones. Convert to add. Convert to add. Why? So now we've got everything. That's the wrong way around. Let me delete this mask and let's just do this one quickly again. I'm going to go select subject. So I'm going to invert it before I take out those pieces that I don't want. It's inverted now. So now my mask is the background, except these poles and that part at the top I actually want to add in. So we're going the other way. Add. I'm going to quickly add that linear gradient in there at the top. So now the whole top part of my image is part of my mask. I'm going to add again, and we're going to go color range, and I'm going to select that pole again. So everything white is going to be added to my mask. We're going to add again. There was a couple of spots in that mask that we just wanted to paint over. So I'm going to use brush tool. I'm going to increase the size a bit. And I'm just brushing over these poles just to make sure that everything in my background is actually now part of that mask. Okay, let's make it a little bit larger again. There's a couple of areas there at the top that I can see. So if you look at this little image, you can see the black part is not part of the mask, which is my subject. Everything else, everything except for this person walking there is now part of my mask. So if I do adjustments like dropping the exposure, it's now only affecting the background and not my subject. So if I'm moving the exposure around, you'll see my subject is not affected by this, but the background is. Okay, so that's quite nice. Let's darken down the background. Let's go to color. I'm going to increase my color temperature. I want that background to be nice and orangey. So we're going to push it to the right. We've got this contrast between the warm and the cold colors in this image. So I'm going to emphasize that. That building in the back, I want to get more orange. So we did that. We can go to effects. We can put some texture and clarity into that background if we wanted to. Detail, I actually want to decrease my sharpness so the background becomes a little bit less sharp. That will put the focus back on my subject in the front. I think that's good for adjusting the background. And now because we've got this mask, we can also adjust our subject. Okay, so I'm going to long press on that. If you long press or right click, if you're working on desktop or a laptop, you'll get a menu similar to this, and you can duplicate this mask. What we can also do is if we slide it out, there's 3 little dots next to this mask. If I click those dots, I can go duplicate. So now I've got 2 of exactly the same masks. Okay, I click on the second one, and I'm going to rename my second mask as subject. I'm going to rename my first one as background. Okay, so now I've got a subject mask and a background mask, but it's just a copy of the other one. So what do we want to do? We want to actually use this one to create one that's just our subject. Okay, so if we take this one, let me see. There we go. So this was our subject, and we can invert it. Invert it. Invert it. Invert it. So now what we want to end up with, let me just do these ones, the brush and the color range again. So what we want to end up with, this is our our subject mask, we're going to subtract from this mask. In this case, we're going to do linear gradient again for the top. We're going to subtract again, color range, pick that pole. We're going to subtract again and pick a brush. We've got a nice big brush. So now I'm just brushing over the areas that I know should not be part of my subject. So this is the same mask, just the inverse. And you can see it on these two little pictures here next to each other. You can see the one is white. That's where my mask is affecting the image. So the background is white, the subject is black. And on this one, it's the opposite. So now if we adjust anything here, in our colors and our light panels, we're actually only adjusting that figure in the foreground. So we can darken down or brighten up just our subject. What we can also do is play with color temperature and make the subject more towards the blue side. So that just increases the saturation there, exposure there a tiny bit. So now you'll see we've got this nice contrast between the more cooler subject and the warmer background. Okay, so the background we went one way with our color adjustment, and on the subject we went. So that's one way of doing some advanced masking, by compositing and subtracting multiple masks from the original one and just fixing where Lightroom actually added some things to this mask that we didn't want. Okay, so that's the first one. Got a nice little image here. We can go masking again, and we're going to edit this one again based on what we can see. Hold on one second. I see the stream has just slowed down a tiny bit. I'll just give it a second to catch up. That should be fine. Okay, good. That's looking healthy again. So let's continue with our second image. We're going to go to masking again. We're going to add a mask again. We're going to go select sky. So what Lightroom is going to do now is it's trying to select the sky for me. There we go. So we've got sky mask. Now you'll see there's a couple of areas in this image that Lightroom, including this little piece of reflection in the glass here, it looks like sky, and it's actually not sky. So, and then we've got another reflection here at the bottom. So this is one of those tricky images again, where Lightroom is looking at this little piece there, and this little piece here actually looks like sky. So Lightroom is identifying it as sky, and we just want to subtract. So again, we go to our little plus minus icon at the bottom, we go subtract, and the easiest way to fix this is just to take a brush tool. We'll make it a little bit smaller. We'll paint over this part that we want to exclude from our mask. We'll paint over. Now we've only got the sky selected. Okay, so now we can adjust the sky. What I actually want to do is adjust the foreground, or the rest, everything except the sky. I want to warm up a bit. So what are we going to do? We're going to the invert button. So right here, we're going to invert. So now with this inverted mask, oh, wrong one, inverted, with our whole mask inverted, we've actually got everything except the sky, and I want to leave the blues as they are. So I'm going to this mask again with a brush, just brushing over this, brushing over this blue area. There we go. So I want to keep the blues blue. There's a bit of blue there as well. Okay. Now we've got a mask that's basically just the buildings and it excludes all the blue areas. What are we going to do with that? We're going to again go to color. We're going to warm that up quite a bit to get that nice orangey glow in the buildings. Going to put a tiny bit of purple tint into that as well. Bring up the saturation, bring up the contrast there. Exposure, that's looking a bit good. So basically what we've done is we've selected everything that is not blue or not sky and not reflected sky, and we've warmed that up quite a bit. So again, we're getting that nice contrast between the warmer colors and the colder colors in this edit. What we can also do is go to our detail panel, add some sharpness, effect panel, add some texture and clarity if we wanted to, and that will then just affect the buildings and everything except these blue areas in this image. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. We'll leave that one right there. Go okay. Now we're going to get to some really advanced images for masking. This one, again, just before we start with the next image, if there's any questions in the chat, I'm happy to answer any questions. Poor connection. Give me 1 second. Let me check my connection. Let me just quickly check my connection as well. If your connection is poor, I'm not sure if it's on my side. This load shedding. Load shedding very often affects our internet connection. So somewhere in the whole network things slow down. Let's just give it 1 second. Anybody else experiencing a poor connection? Let me know if anybody else is experiencing a poor connection. Everybody good? I think we had one comment on poor connection. The view seems blurry. Okay, I think it just picked up again. Sorry for that. This with the load shedding, sometimes the whole network just slows down quite a bit. But I think we should be back. Looking good. Looking fast again. I'll keep an eye on it, but we'll carry on. So this is a really interesting image. Let me show you what happens with Lightroom when the image is too dark. Okay, so we're going to masking. We're going to add a mask. We're going to say select subject, and Lightroom is going to try and find this subject. But because this image is quite dark and there's no detail, you'll see what happens here. In this area of this van, Lightroom is actually selecting some extra area that it thinks is part of my subject, but that's actually not. So it did a pretty good job in finding the actual subject here in the middle, but then it added all this in the back that actually shouldn't be there. Okay. The connection, just by the way, it looks like it's all back and good. So we'll carry on. Now, how do we get Lightroom to actually see our subject and not go to all that stuff in the back? I'm just going to cancel out discard changes. And before I go and do my masking, I'm going to do just an auto adjust. So Lightroom brightens up the image. Like I said previously, if I wanted this image on purpose to be dark, I can do my masking, do my adjustments, and then go and drop my exposure again of my image. But for now, Let's just go, that's the before image, that's the after image. All I did was just hit auto. What you can also do is just increase your exposure, just so that Lightroom can actually see our subject down here. Okay. Now there's a lot more detail, easier to spot the subject, and Lightroom will do a better job. So we go back to masking. We add our subject mask again, and we let Lightroom do its thing. The artificial intelligence is going through. And there we go. Perfect mask. So you see the difference that it's done now. All this back part here on the van that Lightroom previously actually selected is now not part of my mask anymore. So Lightroom has now actually found our subject and decided that this back part of the van is not bleeding into our subject anymore. Okay, so that's a really big difference. If you see that the artificial intelligence is really struggling and your image is maybe either too bright, I've seen it in too bright images, or too dark, first adjust your exposure, adjust the image so that you personally with your own eyes can actually see the subject clearly, and then go back to subject masking, and it will actually do a better job. Now that we've got the mask, we can go and adjust back to a darker image if we actually wanted that for our image. Okay. But we've got our subject. What we're going to do for this one is I'm going to invert it again. I'm going to adjust the background first. So let's flip it. Now we've got the background. What I want to do with the background is I'm going to actually increase the exposure in this case. I want the background to be brighter and my figure to be a bit more of a silhouette against that background. Okay. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go to my color adjustments, and looking at the colors in this image, everything except that pinkish jersey is sort of muted bluer colors. So I'm going to just enhance that a tiny bit, drop my temperature a tiny bit, maybe move my hue slider a little bit, add a little bit of blue again to the background right there. So now we're getting that cooler backgrounds again, and I'm going to be working with that jersey just now. So we want the opposite mask. We go back to make a new mask, we go select subject, and now we're just going to adjust the subject. So this is the power of masking. You can adjust the subject separately from the rest of the image, or the sky separately from the rest of the image. Okay, so this is what makes the masking so powerful. Now we're just adjusting our subject. What I want to do is warm the subject up again, similar to what we did previously. I'm also going to drop the exposure on the subject a little bit, just to get our subject to be a bit more almost silhouette-y, increasing the contrast there. The black points I'm going to bring down a tiny bit. So now there's a bit more contrast between the brighter background and the subject in front. And on the color panel, I'm going to just adjust this hue a tiny bit towards the warm side. I'm going to include a bit more red in our subject. So now we've changed that color. Find a nice dark red or an orange. Orange can also do it. So we want something nice and warm. I'm going to warm it up a little bit more. Let's see what our tint does. Our saturation can come down a tiny bit. It's a little bit bright in color. So there we go. That's where the power of masking comes in, where we can get down to these sort of details and adjust backgrounds and foregrounds and subjects separately from each other. Okay. We can go to detail and just sharpen our subject also a little bit. And that should almost do for this image. I think what I do want to do is her pants they don't really fit in this image from what I can see. So we'll do one last mask. So I'm going to go select subject again. And what I'm going to do now is just adjust the color in her pants, because it doesn't really work for me in this specific image. Okay, and we're going to go subtract from mask. I'm just using the brush again, and I'm just brushing over the top. So what we're doing is we're excluding the top part and just getting her pants. Okay, that's looking good. Now we're going back to color. I'm going to drop the saturation a bit just to take some of that color out of it. Warm it up a bit, and then we're changing the hue again to something that will work a bit better in this image. Drop the exposure. So that looks already a lot better. I think we can do better than that though. Let's see if we can fine tune this. And when it comes to color editing, it's all about really finely doing tiny little edits just to find the perfect spot. I think that's looking a lot better. Maybe even a little bit more towards the bluer side. That's looking perfect. So her pants were really distracting color to me. When I'm doing street photography, I might not go into like detailed edits like that and spend this much time on an edit. But it's just showing you the power of these masking tools that we've got. So that would be the final image there. Quite a bit different to where we started. We changed the colors separately in the background to the foreground. We changed the colors separately in her pants, and I think we've got a good image. Looking good. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, this is just to show you how dodging and burning actually works when it comes to masking. So generally, if you go into Photoshop, you've got dodging and burning. That means just either lightening an area or darkening an area. We use it a lot in portraits as well, or pretty often in portraits we would use dodging and burning. And also previously developing especially monochrome images in the darkroom. Some areas you could block off so that they develop darker, or just use different masks or little pieces of cardboard on sticks to get some areas of your image to go darker or lighter compared to other areas, and because of the light shining on when you're developing your image. So it's something that's been going around since before digital editing, before Photoshop, before Lightroom, and it's a very nice technique. And previously, without the masking in Lightroom, we had to always go to Photoshop to do any dodging and burning. So that's lightening some areas, darkening other areas. Now with masking, we can actually do it right here in Lightroom. Very powerful thing to do. And you can change the look of an image quite a bit by using dodging and burning. And this image, I'm just going to hit auto to just get it a little bit lighter. And I want to show you, especially on a black and white image, exactly what dodging and burning does and how you can shape something. In portraits, you can use it to really get a bit more shape, pronounced shape in somebody's face as well. And just in general, in street photography, landscape photography, you can darken some areas by just painting over them. You can lighten up some other areas where you want some detail coming through in the shadows. And it's a very powerful tool if you take your time to dodge and burn in selective areas. So how do we do it with masking? We go to our masking again, and just as an example of how you can change the shape of something, is what we're seeing in images, especially when we're looking at a black and white image, is we're seeing light and dark areas. And in a lot of cases, what we perceive as something that's three-dimensional is only light hitting one side and a shadow on the other side. And that's what tells our brains that this thing is three-dimensional. So let me show you what I mean. Right here on his shirt, in this area, it's pretty flat. If you look at it, your brain tells you his shirt is pretty flat right there. Now what we're going to do with some dodging and burning is we're actually going to put a crease, a realistic looking crease right there on his shirt. So as if it was creased, like bunched up. So how do we do with that? If light is hitting his shirt sort of at an angle, it would be brighter on one side if there was a crease, because that's the side towards the light, and the opposite side of that crease would be darker. So we can artificially create that, and this is just an example of how you can manipulate how light hits something. Okay, so we're going to the brush tool. I'm going to adjust the size. Yeah, this top, just these three little things on the brush tool. The top one is the size, so this adjusts the size of my brush. The second one adjusts the feather, so you can get something that's really harsh, no fall off on the sides, or you can make it fall off slowly to away from the middle so it blends in better. And the bottom one is how transparent it is, so that's our flow. If you bring it down, you can paint over the same area multiple times to layer an effect. If you bring it up, that effect will be fully applied in that area. Okay, let's adjust this sizing to a size that makes sense to make our little crease. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to paint right here on his shirt, on this flat part of his shirt. I'm just painting in, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to light. We're going to let's say the light is coming from our left hand side going over to the right, so this part I would expect to be a little bit brighter. Now we do the exact same thing with another brush right next to it, and I'm going to drop my exposure on this one. So just by doing that, let me say done. You see the crease there on his shirt? You see how right there on his shirt now there's a crease. You can see that there's shape there. If I hide my mask, it looks nice and flat there on his shirt. If I show it again, there's a little crease. Okay, you can also do the opposite. If you want to flatten out something that in your image caught a little bit of light on one side and add a shadow on the other side, you do just the opposite. So you paint in the dark side, make it a little bit lighter. Paint in the light side, make it a little bit darker. You go the opposite way to take a little crease in a shirt, you can take it away. But you can also, with how light hits a subject in a portrait, you can also shape their features a little bit, and then you can help that along to get a little bit of a more shaped look in somebody's face, for instance, by doing exactly this. So in the rest of the image, we can also apply some dodging and burning. So I'm going to just go brush again. I'm going to brush maybe this area right here across his eyes. I'm going to brush that in. We're going to increase the light a tiny bit, just get a little bit of light into his eyes. Maybe the background, we want to do the opposite. So we're going back to the brush. I'm going to increase my size. And this part of the background is a little bit bright for me. And I'm just painting over this part of the background and dropping my exposure a tiny bit on that part. We can also drop the highlights. So that's how we can basically get to a dodging and burning tool. In Photoshop, it's dodging and burning. In Lightroom, it's basically just brush on masking. So we can lighten up specific areas. Let me take this mask away so you can see this was the original image. This was some dodging and burning. And we'll have a look at one more example where we can get a bit more shape even in a close-up portrait. So let's have a look at this one. Now this whole image I'm going to edit by just using masks. So normally we would jump in, we would go to our global sliders and things, and we would edit this portrait in Lightroom. 6 months to a year ago, I probably would have gone into Photoshop because the tools just weren't in Lightroom to properly edit a studio portrait like this. But now we've got the tools all in Lightroom. We can really hone in on different areas and get a good image. So let's do some advanced masking in this image. I'm going to go select subject and let Lightroom do its thing. Lightroom is going to be selecting my subject. That's a pretty good selection. What I'm going to do is press my invert button again because I'm trying to get to my background right now. There we go. Now the background is selected. Okay, just one click and I've got the background selected. Let's do some adjustments to the background. I'm going to increase the contrast a tiny bit. I'm going to just brighten it up the tiniest bit to get some separation between her hair and the background. I'm going to go to color. Let's do some color adjustment. I'm going to be adding some, should we do blues or should we do something a bit more brownish? I think that's actually looking quite good. So that's the original image. That's the background. That's a little bit warmer. I think that's actually looking good. I like that color. Going for a bit of a monochromatic color palette, so less colors in this image. I don't want the background to be too blue or too white. I think that's pretty good. I might actually just bring my exposure back down a tiny bit to get a darker, richer color there in the background. That's looking good. I'm happy with that. Effects, we're just looking at the background. So I'm going to just drop my texture for in case there's any detail on that background. I'm also going to just drop the sharpness of the background a tiny bit in case there's any detail there. What I might also do, actually I'm pretty happy with that. My background is looking quite nice. Okay. Background done. Background done. Now the next one. Okay. Done. I'm happy with the background. Now we're going to start masking on our subject. So new mask, select subject. And we're just going piece by piece through this image. You could do this with a landscape image if there's a specific, let's say there's a building that's the focal point. You could do this with cityscape images, with street photography, whatever you want to do. Break it up into different areas that you want to edit and then just adjust those areas separate from the rest. Okay, so now we've got our subject again. What I actually want to do is maybe drop our highlights a tiny bit in our subject, open up the shadows a tiny bit, just get a bit more detail back in her hair. That's quite dark. That's actually looking quite good. I'm pretty happy with that adjustment. So let's go done. Now let's see if we can do something, maybe adjust skin a little bit. So how do we do that? I'm going to try color range. So we picked on the masking for color range, and we're going to see if we pick sort of the midpoint here on her cheek, if we can isolate just her skin. So you'll see if I move this over here, it selects more. If we move it back, it selects less. And somewhere in there, probably just skin. Okay. So now we've got skin selected. That's our mask. I'm going to apply it. Now we can just adjust her skin. I'm going to go to detail, noise reduction. A tiny bit of noise reduction might help a little bit to soften skin. Sharpness, I'm going to go the opposite way, just to soften skin again. That's actually looking good on skin. Dehaze, if you go to the negative direction, it actually introduces haze. So if you're doing street photography, well, let's say landscape photography or cityscape, if it's a hazy day, you get a bit of haze, you lose contrast in your image. So if you pull your dehaze slider to the positive side, it takes that haze away and makes things more clear by introducing some contrast. Okay. On a portrait, on skin, you can actually go the opposite way. So you're introducing haze, so you're introducing fog or mist onto the skin. which just softens it a tiny bit. Again, with portraits, very often with modern digital cameras, skin is just too sharp. If you go back to film cameras, especially if you had some filters for skin, softening skin on those old film cameras, the images were a lot softer, and the new digital cameras are just, there's just too much detail in the skin. So we're actually trying to take some of that back down. Okay, so we're going to go negative on our DAs. Let me show you. If I go all the way, it basically introduces fog or mist into those areas. So we just want to do a tiniest little bit just to soften the skin a tiny little bit. If you do that, just remember that you also lose a little bit of color. So you want to put some color back in. I'm going to pull clarity a little bit down. I'm going to pull texture quite a bit down. And you'll see that that's actually done a really good skin softening in this case. We're going to go to color. Like I said, if you do DAs in the negative direction, it takes some color out. Just might want to pop a little bit of color back in just by adding saturation. Or what we can also do is we can increase our color temperature a tiny bit just to warm it up a tiniest bit. Okay, that's looking good. Maybe a tiny bit warm. Okay, so looking good there. Let me show you what we did to the skin. I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to hold my mask so that hides whatever that panel did. So this was the original image. This is after doing a little bit of skin work. And like I said, this sort of editing we could only do in Photoshop a couple of months ago. Now we've got the tools to actually do it in Lightroom. What else can we do in this image? Okay, a little bit more masking. I think we go back to masking. We do radial gradient. Radial gradients is round ones or oval ones, which is perfect for eyes. So let's do that. I'm just going to drag it there. So we're going to just edit eyes in this case. You can also rotate it a tiny bit. What I just want to do is I just want to increase the exposure a tiny bit. Brighten it up the tiniest bit. Not even a full stop. 2/3 of a stop I think is perfect. I'm going to put a little bit of contrast in there. We're going to go to effects. We're going to put a tiny bit of clarity in there as well. Detail. We're going to sharpen it because we want sharp eyes. We softened the skin a bit. If we sharpen the eyes a tiny bit, then there will be a nice contrast between the two. That will give us a good effect. And what will happen is you will immediately notice her eyes in this image. Okay. So that's looking good. I'm pretty happy with all our edits right there. I'm going to click done. So now we've just got it on one eye. So look right there. If we take our masking away, so that's without any edits, that's with edits, I think that looks already quite nice. The other nice thing we can do now is we can go to this eye mask that we've got and just long press on it, and we can go duplicate. Now we've got two of them. We can put the other one on the other eye, just adjust it. Hey, I want to rotate it. There we go. Just adjust it to fit the other eye. So this is our one eye, that's our other eye. Maybe just a little bit more light in there. There we go. That's looking good. Let's see. Without the mask, with the mask. Without, with. I think that's starting to look really good. Now it's up to you. You can do some really fine adjustments. What I might want to do right here is also just bring some sharpness back into her lips. So let's do that. I'm going to use brush, just adjust the size. Just going to brush over her lips there. I think some sharpness and detail there would be nice as well. There we go. We go to light. Actually a little bit of contrast. Color, we might want to just push the saturation up a tiny bit, get more color in there. Texture, we can then add a bit. Detail, we can add a bit of sharpness. And again, that's looking good. So that's where we are right now. That's before, that's after. So every little edit, every little mask that we stack on top of the other ones gets us closer to where we want to be. I think that's already looking quite good. We're getting very close to a good image. And to finish it off, what we could do is just do some dodging and burning. We talked about dodging and burning and how it can shape things and how it can emphasize lighter areas and darker areas. Now, a little tip on dodging and burning, especially when you do portraits, but also the same thing actually applies to things like buildings, mountains. What you want to actually do to enhance an image, to get some more depth to an image, is you want to dodge, you actually want to darken the areas that's already in shadows and lighten the areas that's where the light actually hits. So you basically need to figure out, let's say you've got a building, if there's one darker side and one lighter side where the sun was shining on, dodging and burning it in that same ratio actually enhances your 3D effect of your image. The same with this. So what we're going to be looking for is places where we got a bit more light in this image, and enhance that in the spots we want to, and that will probably give us a good effect. So that's the first one we're going to do. We're going to go masking. We're going to add and stack another brush tool on top of what we've already got. Let's just look at the size here. I'm just going to go down a tiny bit in size. What I'm looking for now is just the lighter parts where light hit her hair. So where we've got streaks of a bit of light in her hair, I'm going to enhance it. I'm going to bring it up even more. Okay, so I'm just painting over any areas where I see we add a bit of light hitting her hair. And I don't have to be very accurate for this effect to work. I think those are the areas that we got some light shining into her hair. And I'm going to go to light. I'm going to just up my shadows a tiny bit, up my exposure a tiny bit. So that just brightens up those little patches of light we had in her hair. I think that helps already. We're going to do a similar thing. We add a light, if you look in her eyes, we add a light right above her. So basically, with the light straight in front and shining from above coming down, what happened is the shadow part under her cheekbones, they're there, we can see them already, but we might want to just enhance that a tiny bit. So the light fell on top of her cheekbones. There's a little bit of a shadow below her cheekbones. And we're just going to try and enhance that the tiniest little bit, just to get a bit more of a sculptured look. This is not necessary generally, but just to show you what it does to when we dodge and burn a portrait like this. I'm going to go brush again. Let's check my size. Okay, now I'm going to look for those shadows. So we've got some shadows on the side of her face and under her cheekbones, and I'm just lightly going to paint in. And if you overdo these sort of effects, it's probably not going to be looking good. We've got some shadow down here under her cheekbones. So in a case like this, less is more. You don't want to do a lot of it. The mask we can paint in and we can see the mask, but the adjustments we're going to do really subtly. So I'm just going to drop highlights a tiny bit. If there's any highlights in those shadow areas, they're going to go down. And then I'm dropping the exposure also just the tiniest bit, maybe a third of a stop, half a stop. That should already give us a good effect that we can see. So 2/3 of a stop. I wouldn't go more than that. This is actually more than I would ever really do, but I want the effect to be noticeable to you. Then we're going to do the opposite. So we're creating that 3D shape. We're looking now for the lighter, the brighter areas to enhance that. So I'm going back to brush. Now I'm going to brush here where the actual light fell, where we got the light right on top here, top of her cheeks, maybe a tiny bit of light that we've got right here. Okay, and I think that would probably do everything that we need to do there. And because we can do this selectively, we're not doing it to the overall picture. We're not just adding contrast and making the shadows darker. We're selectively doing it in places that we want. We can get a nice effect. So now with these areas, we're going the opposite way. So we're just increasing our exposure maybe by 2/3 of a stop again. And our shadows, we're now lifting. If there's any shadows in those areas we painted, we're lifting it. Now it should be a pretty subtle difference, but looking at her face, if I take the mask off, look at her cheeks, the nice soft light also flattened everything a little bit and flattened her features a little bit. And now with that dodging and burning, we can get some more 3D look into that. It might be too much. I think we got too much of a pop there. So easy enough, we go back to that last adjustment we did to light, and we just take a little bit of that extra light that we added away. I think that looks pretty good. Now you can see again, without the masking, it's pretty flat light, pretty soft, straight in front. By just adding a tiny bit of a shadow under her cheekbones and lightening the top, we get this effect. That just gives us a bit more 3D sculpted look in this portrait. Okay. So all these things, it might not be something that you would do to most images, but it's nice to know where to find these tools. It's nice to know what these tools will do. It's nice to know that you can adjust and edit a complete image just in Lightroom. This is how powerful our Lightroom tools have become, with masking and selective editing in specific areas. So we can, in general, avoid going over to Photoshop, even with retouching portraits like this. So beauty portraits, sort of magazine cover sort of work. Retouching eyes, retouching lips, doing skin. It's all possible now in Lightroom. And this is, like I said, this is sort of the extreme side of editing, where generally I don't like to go there, but we've got the tools, and it's good to know how these tools work in case you do need it for a specific project. And these things equally work well in landscapes, in cityscapes, in street photography, where you can just adjust specific areas to get the look you want. Is there anybody who's got any questions at this stage? Any questions about the edits? Anything you want to go over again or see again? What I will do is, when we had that little glitch, we were, I think, on this image. I can show you just a quick mask on this one. Let me go back to my iPad. So there we go. Let's say this bottom reflection, I just want to adjust only that bottom reflection without adjusting the rest of the image. Just a quick recap. I think this is where the stream was a little bit laggy. Let me do this while the questions roll in. I'm going to just add a mask. I'm going to just use a linear mask. So this is how we can stack masks. So now everything under that mask will be adjusted. So we've got this part right here that we actually don't want. And the nice thing with the way Lightroom's new masking works is we can subtract. So we can go again to our subtract from mask. We can do another linear gradient, and we actually want it this way around. And in live on the screen, you can see it subtract from the other mask. So something like this. Now we've only got that part that we want with that mask. So if we go back to that mask, you'll see also in this little picture, we've only got that triangle that's masked. So as easy as that, now I'm only adjusting that reflection. So let's do something extreme that I wouldn't ever do, but we could, for instance, drop the saturation for that reflection, and now we've got a monochrome reflection and a color image above. That's how powerful these tools are. If you can think about doing something, you could probably do it with masking in Lightroom. Okay, let's have a look at the questions. Do the layers or masks have a transparency adjustment option? No. The mask itself doesn't have. So in a layer in Photoshop, you can just adjust the transparency on that actual layer. In Lightroom, the masks don't have a transparency option, but for instance, a linear gradient will go from like fully opaque to fully transparent between those lines. So if we have a look at, just let me add another linear gradient. So if you look at that linear gradient, you'll see this area has got some transparency to it. This has got less transparency to it, and this part is full mask. Okay, so this is opaque when it comes to mask, and it fades down, becomes more transparent to the bottom. So the effects you get, depending on how you mask and how you paint and how you stack these masks, you could get some transparency in your masks. You could also do the brush tool and drop your flow to maybe 10%, which means it would be 90% transparent, 10% opaque, and you could paint the mask in with that. So you get some transparency there. But the other nice thing is, whatever my effect, so let's say I'm just dropping my exposure. If my adjustment was dropping my exposure by 4 stops and I want only half of that, I could drop it by 2 stops. So where's 2 stops? Now I've dropped it 2 stops, or I could drop it 1 stop. So the nice thing with Lightroom is it's not destructive editing. Although we don't get a transparency layer where we can adjust it, we can just go back to the sliders and do less of whatever we did. So that's a nice thing. But no, we can't adjust transparency on the actual mask. There's just these 2 ways of doing it. It's either masking it to be a bit more transparent, or just dialing back on the sliders. So if it was too much, just dial the slider back on whatever you did, which would give you a similar effect to Photoshop, just working with the transparency. So even without that, you can get the exact same effect that you would in Photoshop. What's the next question? Oh, cool. You like the changes on her eyes? I can show you that again. Just again. So that's eyes and mouth. That's before, that's after. Okay. So super powerful tool if you need it. That's quite nice. Any more questions? Anything else? I think we're good then. That would be time. If anybody has any questions later on or during the week, happy to answer them in the WhatsApp group as well. You can just pop the questions in there. And especially, I'm not the best landscape photographer. I like street photography. I like portraits. But I really want to see some people going and doing some selective masking in landscape or cityscape images, because it can completely change the look of an image. Maybe a mountain with some shadow on the one side, some highlights on the other side. You could work with that shape. There's so many possibilities for absolutely transforming a picture or a landscape image or a cityscape image when you apply these masks. So I would love to see some examples. Post them so I can see them. That would be nice. All the great landscape and cityscape photographers out there. But thank you for joining on this cold evening. Much appreciated. Have a great evening. I'm going to call it there, and I will see you next week. And keep the suggestions coming of anything that you want to cover. If you want to see something, maybe like a landscape image with selective masking and things, we could do that. Whatever you want to do, let me know, and we can jump into that. Have a great week. Cheers.